There is a bag of soil sitting on my patio right now that produced 18 pounds of potatoes. Not in a field, not in a raised bed, in a simple fabric bag that cost me less than a single fast food meal. And the thing that gets me every time is that I spent over a decade breaking my back digging trenches, fighting clay soil, battling wireworms, and losing entire harvests to rot, when the solution was this simple all along. The reason you have likely never heard about this method in any serious way is honestly kind of annoying. It works too well and costs too little for anyone to make real money selling it to you. There is no proprietary system to buy, no special fertilizer blend you have to subscribe to, and no equipment that requires a payment plan. Just a bag, some dirt, and a potato. That is the whole idea, and once you see how this works, you will start looking at every empty corner of your patio, your balcony, even your driveway as potential potato-growing space. I know exactly what you might be thinking right now. Probably just another internet gimmick that falls apart the second you actually try it. I completely understand your skepticism. I thought exactly the same thing until I saw with my own eyes what a single fabric bag could produce. My first season trying this, I used 3 bags as a test. I harvested just under 50 pounds of potatoes from 3 bags that took up less space than a parking spot. Hand on heart, I have never had a harvest that clean, that easy, and that productive in all my years of gardening. And I have been at this for a good 15 years now. So let me walk you through exactly why this works, why everything else you have tried probably failed, and how to set this up so that you genuinely never have to buy potatoes again. And I mean that literally. Not as an exaggeration. Not as clickbait. I am talking about a system where you harvest, cure, store, and replant from your own stock, year after year with almost no ongoing cost. Let us start with the problem that most people do not even realize they have. If you have ever tried growing potatoes in the ground, you know the drill. You wait for the soil to warm up enough to work, which where I live means standing outside on a March morning with the wind cutting through your jacket, staring at a patch of mud that still has frost crusted around the edges. You dig a trench. You drop in your seed potatoes. You hill up the soil as the plants grow, which means more digging, more bending, more wheelbarrow loads of soil hauled across the yard in the heat. And then, somewhere around midsummer, you start noticing things going wrong. The leaves yellow too early. You dig around to check on a plant and find potatoes that have been chewed through by wireworms or slugs. Or worse, you wait until the plants die back, you grab your fork, and you start digging up tubers that are half-rotted, scabbed over, or so misshapen they look like something from a biology textbook. Do you know that feeling? I know it all too well. I have spent entire autumn afternoons on my knees, sifting through heavy clay soil, finding maybe a third of the harvest I expected, and the rest either damaged or completely missing. I remember one year specifically, I had planted a 20-foot row of russets. I had amended the soil. I had watered religiously. I had done everything the books told me to do. And when I dug them up, I got maybe 12 pounds of usable potatoes. The rest were either riddled with wireworm tunnels or had rotted into a black mush that smelled like a compost pile gone wrong. I sat there in the dirt, sweaty and exhausted, holding a spading fork in one hand and a mangled potato in the other, and I thought, there has to be a better way. And the real kicker is that the solution most people reach for makes the problem worse. Let me tell you about the usual fixes and why they fail. The first thing people try is amending their soil. They add compost, they add sand, they double dig, they break their backs trying to turn heavy clay into something fluffy and workable. I have done this. I have spent entire weekends with a shovel and a wheelbarrow, layering in composted manure, sharp sand, leaf mold. All the things the gardening books tell you will fix heavy soil. And you know what happens the next year. The clay compacts again. The organic matter breaks down. The soil settles. The worms and the microbes do their work, which is great for the soil in the long run, but they consume the organic matter and it shrinks. And you are right back where you started, except now you have a chiropractor bill and a lingering resentment toward your own backyard. Then there is the chemical route. People start applying fungicides for the rot, insecticides for the wireworms, synthetic fertilizers to push growth. And I want you to think about what you are actually doing when you go down this path. You are treating a structural problem with a chemical bandage. The soil is still compacted. The drainage is still poor. The pests are still in the ground. You are just poisoning the zone around your potatoes and hoping for the best. And the worst part is that those chemicals do not just kill the pests. They kill the beneficial organisms too. The mycorrhizal fungi that help roots absorb nutrients. The predatory insects that would have eaten the wireworm larvae. The earthworms that aerate the soil. You wipe all of that out, and then you are even more dependent on the chemicals next year because the natural controls are gone. It is like putting a fresh coat of paint on a house with a crumbling foundation. It looks fine for a month, and then the cracks show up again. And then there is the raised bed solution. Now, I am not going to tell you raised beds are bad. They are not. They solve a lot of problems. But they also introduce new ones. A proper raised bed costs money to build. You need lumber or stone or some kind of framing material. You need a huge volume of soil to fill it. I built a 4 by 8 foot raised bed a few years ago, and just the soil to fill it cost me over $80. That was for a single bed. And once it is in place, it is permanent. You cannot move it. You cannot rotate your crops easily. You are locked in. And for potatoes specifically, you are still digging at harvest time, just from a slightly more comfortable height. The fundamental problem remains. You are still excavating tubers from a mass of soil, still risking fork damage, still missing the ones that hide in the corners. So what did people do before all of this? Before Home Depot and garden centers and chemical companies told us we needed a dozen products to grow a simple potato. This is where the story gets interesting. And this is where I need to introduce you to the way people have been growing potatoes in difficult conditions for a very long time. I did not invent this method. I stumbled onto it the way I stumble onto most of the best things in my garden, through sheer frustration followed by a chance encounter with someone who knew better. About 5 years ago, I was visiting a community garden plot on the edge of town. It was one of those places tucked behind a church parking lot, where the plots are small, and the gardeners are mostly retirees who have been tending the same patch of soil since before I was born. I was there to pick up some tomato starts from a friend, and I noticed an older woman working in a corner of the garden that I had never paid much attention to before. She had what looked like a dozen bags lined up against a south-facing wall. Not fancy bags, not anything you would see in a catalog. Just simple fabric grow bags, the kind you can buy for a few dollars each, filled with what looked like ordinary potting mix. And spilling out of the top of every single bag were the healthiest potato plants I had ever seen. Deep green leaves, thick, sturdy stems, no yellowing, no spots, no insect damage. They looked like they belonged on the cover of a seed catalog. I asked her about them, and she smiled in that way that people who have been gardening for 40 years smile when a younger gardener finally asks the right question. It is a particular kind of smile, patient and a little amused, like she had been waiting for someone to notice what she was doing. She told me she had not put a shovel in the ground for potatoes in over a decade. She said the ground was too much work, too unpredictable, and too hard on her back. She had arthritis in her hands and a hip that bothered her when she bent over for too long. So she switched to bags and never looked back. She was harvesting more potatoes than she could eat, from a space smaller than my kitchen, using nothing but bags, soil, and seed potatoes she saved from the previous year. She gave her extra potatoes to her neighbors and her church. She had not bought a potato in over 10 years. I went home that day and ordered my first set of grow bags before I even took my boots off. And I have never dug a potato trench since. So let me tell you exactly what you need and exactly how to do this. And I want you to pay close attention to the details here, because there are a few mistakes that will cost you your harvest if you are not careful. I made some of them myself that first season, and I am going to spare you that frustration. First, the bags. You want fabric grow bags, not plastic pots, not plastic bags, not trash bags with holes poked in them. The fabric is important for a reason I will explain in a moment. The ideal size is 10 to 15 gallons. You can go up to 20 gallons if you want truly massive plants, but 10 gallons is the sweet spot for most home growers. A 10-gallon bag will hold about 2 to 3 seed potatoes, and will produce somewhere between 8 and 15 pounds of potatoes, depending on the variety and the season. You can buy these bags in multi-packs online for roughly $2 to $3 per bag. If you want to save even more money, you can use reusable fabric shopping bags, the sturdy kind with reinforced handles. Just make sure they are not lined with plastic on the inside. You want breathable fabric all the way through. Hold the bag up to the light. If you can see pinpricks of light coming through the weave, it will work. If it is a solid sheet with no light penetration, it is lined and you should not use it. The soil is the next critical piece. And this is where I see the most failures. People try to save money by filling their bags with cheap topsoil or, worse, digging up dirt from their yard and shoveling it in. Do not do this. I know it is tempting. I know that bag of topsoil at the garden center is half the price of good potting mix. But potatoes in a bag need a growing medium that is light, fluffy, and drains extremely well. If the soil is too heavy, it compacts in the bag. The water cannot drain properly, and your potatoes will rot before they ever size up. I use a mix that is roughly 2 parts high-quality potting mix to 1 part compost. The potting mix gives you the lightness and drainage. It is designed to hold air pockets even when wet. The compost gives you the nutrients and the microbial life. If you want to get fancy, you can add a handful of perlite for extra aeration, but it is not strictly necessary. What is necessary is that when you squeeze a handful of your mix, it should feel springy and loose, not dense and sticky. It should crumble apart when you open your hand, not hold the shape of your fist. Now the seed potatoes. And I want to be very clear here because this is important. You want certified seed potatoes if this is your first time growing. I know they cost more than the sprouted potatoes sitting in your pantry. I know it is tempting to just chop up that bag of grocery store potatoes that started growing eyes and stick them in the soil. I have done it myself, and sometimes that works. But here is the problem. Grocery store potatoes are often treated with a sprout inhibitor, which means they will not grow well even if they have started to sprout. The inhibitor is designed to do exactly that, prevent sprouting, and it can linger in the tuber even after you see eyes forming. And more importantly, grocery store potatoes can carry diseases that will contaminate your soil and ruin future harvests. Things like bacterial ring rot or potato virus Y. You cannot see them. The potato looks fine. But once those pathogens are in your growing medium, they are incredibly difficult to get rid of. Certified seed potatoes are guaranteed disease-free, and they are selected for vigorous growth. Spend the extra few dollars. It is worth it. Once you have your seed potatoes, you need to prepare them. If they are small, about the size of a golf ball or a chicken egg, you can plant them whole. If they are larger, you want to cut them into pieces, each piece containing at least 2 eyes. The eyes are those little dimples where the sprouts will emerge. Look closely and you will see them. Small indentations on the skin, sometimes with a tiny nub of a sprout already beginning to push out. Each eye is a potential stem. After cutting, let the pieces sit out on a counter for 24 to 48 hours so the cut surfaces can callus over. This is not optional. If you put freshly cut potatoes directly into damp soil, they will rot. The raw cut flesh is an open wound, and soil is full of bacteria and fungi that will happily colonize it. The callus forms a protective barrier, a dry, leathery seal that keeps the moisture and pathogens out while the potato gets established. I usually cut mine in the evening, lay them out on a baking sheet lined with newspaper, and let them sit in a cool room overnight and through the next day. By the following evening, the cut surfaces are dry to the touch and slightly shrunken. That is what you want. Now let me walk you through the planting process step by step, because the timing and the layering are everything here. Take your empty bag and roll down the sides so that the bag is only about 8 to 10 inches tall. You are going to start with just a few inches of soil in the bottom. Fill the bag with about 4 inches of your potting mix and compost blend. Place your seed potatoes on top of this layer. Cut side down if you cut them, with the eyes facing up. For a 10-gallon bag, use 2 or 3 seed potatoes spaced evenly apart. Do not crowd them. Potatoes need room to develop, and cramming too many seed potatoes into one bag will give you a lot of small potatoes, instead of a reasonable number of large ones. I made this mistake my first year. I thought more seed potatoes means more potatoes. I put 5 in one bag. What I got was about 20 tiny potatoes, none bigger than a golf ball, all competing for the same limited space and nutrients. 2 or 3 is the sweet spot. Cover the seed potatoes with another 3 to 4 inches of your soil mix. Water thoroughly until water runs out of the bottom of the bag. This initial watering is crucial. It settles the soil around the seed potatoes and kickstarts the whole process. You want to eliminate air pockets around the seed pieces because air pockets dry out roots. Water slowly and evenly, letting the water soak in rather than running off the top. Place the bag in a location that gets at least 6 hours of direct sunlight per day. More is better. Potatoes are sun-loving plants, and the more light they get, the more energy they have to produce tubers. Watch the sun patterns on your property for a day. Notice where the light falls and for how long. That is where your bags go. Now here is the part that most people get wrong, and it is the secret to the entire method. As the potato plants grow, you are going to add more soil. A lot more soil. This is called hilling, and it is the same principle as hilling potatoes in the ground, but it is so much easier in a bag. Here is why hilling matters. Potatoes form on stems that grow above the seed potato, not below it. If those stems are exposed to sunlight, they will turn green and start producing chlorophyll and solanine, which is toxic. You do not want green potatoes. But more importantly, the portion of the stem that is buried in darkness will produce stolons, which are the structures that eventually swell into tubers. The more stem you bury, the more potatoes you get. This is not a small difference. A plant that is hilled properly can produce twice the yield of one that is not. So here is what you do. Wait until your potato plants are about 6 to 8 inches tall above the soil line. Then add another 3 to 4 inches of your soil mix, burying the bottom half of the stems. Unroll the sides of the bag slightly as you go to accommodate the added soil. Water again. Wait until the plants grow another 6 to 8 inches above the new soil line. Add more soil. Repeat this process until the bag is full and the soil level is about 2 inches below the rim. This is the rhythm of potato bag growing. You are essentially building the growing environment in layers as the plant reaches upward. And because the bag is fabric, the roots and the developing tubers get something they never get in the ground: air. And this brings me to the science of why fabric bags work so much better than anything else. I want you to think about what happens to roots in a plastic pot. They grow outward until they hit the wall of the pot. Then they start circling. They wrap around and around, getting tighter and tighter, eventually becoming root-bound and strangling themselves. This is why plants in plastic pots eventually stop thriving no matter how much you water and fertilize them. The roots have formed a dense, tangled mat that cannot absorb water or nutrients efficiently. The plant is essentially choking itself. Fabric bags do something completely different. When roots reach the fabric wall, they encounter air. The fabric breathes, and when a root tip hits air, it undergoes a process called air pruning. The tip dies back, and the plant responds by sending out more lateral roots further back along the root system. Instead of one circling root, you get a dense, fibrous network of roots throughout the entire soil volume. More roots mean more nutrient uptake, more water absorption, and ultimately more potatoes. If you were to cut open a fabric bag at the end of the season and look at the root structure, you would see roots filling every inch of the soil, right up to the edges with no circling. It is a beautiful thing. The breathability also solves the drainage problem. Excess water simply drains out through the fabric. You cannot overwater a fabric bag the way you can overwater a plastic pot. The soil stays moist but never waterlogged. And potatoes, more than almost any other crop, hate sitting in wet soil. Wet soil is what causes rot. Wet soil is what attracts fungus. The fabric bag eliminates this problem almost entirely. I have left my bags out in a week of heavy rain, the kind of rain that would have turned my in-ground potato patch into a swamp, and the bags just drained and kept on going. The plants did not even flinch. There is one more benefit that I did not expect when I first started using these bags, and it turned out to be significant. Temperature regulation. Black plastic pots absorb heat from the sun and can cook the roots of your plants on a hot day. I have measured soil temperatures in black plastic pots that exceeded 110 degrees Fahrenheit in direct summer sun. That is lethal for potatoes. Potato tubers stop developing when soil temperatures get above about 75 degrees, and above 85 degrees, the plants start to shut down entirely. Fabric bags, especially the lighter-colored ones, reflect more heat and allow evaporative cooling through the sides. The soil stays cooler, and the potatoes develop better. On a 95-degree day, I have measured the soil inside a tan fabric bag at a full 15 degrees cooler than the soil inside a black plastic pot sitting right next to it. That is the difference between a harvest and a failure. Now let me tell you about a mistake I made in my first season that cost me about a third of my harvest, so you do not repeat it. I did not fertilize enough. I assumed that the compost in my initial mix would carry the plants through the entire season. It did not. Potatoes are heavy feeders. They are building a lot of biomass underground, and they need a steady supply of nutrients to do it. Once your plants are about a foot tall and you have added your first round of hilling soil, you need to start feeding them. I use a simple organic fertilizer, something with a higher phosphorus and potassium number than nitrogen. You do not want too much nitrogen, because that will give you huge, lush green tops and very few potatoes. The plant puts all its energy into leaves instead of tubers. I have seen this happen. The plants look amazing, waist-high and jungle green, and you think you are going to have a record harvest. Then you dump the bag and find 4 sad little potatoes the size of marbles. Look for a fertilizer where the middle number, which is phosphorus, is higher than the first number, which is nitrogen. Something like a 5-10-10 or a 3-6-6 works beautifully. Apply it according to the package directions every 2 to 3 weeks during the active growing season. Water it in well. Watering is the other piece of the puzzle that requires consistency. Fabric bags dry out faster than in ground soil because they are exposed to air on all sides. This is a good thing for preventing rot, but it means you cannot ignore them for a week and expect them to be fine. During the heat of summer, you may need to water every day. The test is simple. Stick your finger into the soil up to the second knuckle. If it feels dry at that depth, water until it runs out the bottom. If it still feels moist, wait another day and check again. Consistent moisture is the key. Potatoes that go through wet-dry cycles will develop hollow heart, which is exactly what it sounds like, a hollow cavity in the center of the potato. It is not harmful, but it is disappointing, and it ruins the texture. You slice open what looks like a perfect potato and find a jagged brown crack running through the middle. It is caused by the potato growing rapidly during wet periods and then stopping during dry periods, creating internal stress fractures. Steady, even watering prevents it. As the season progresses, you will notice the potato plants flowering. This is a sign that the plants are beginning to set tubers underground. It is exciting, but do not harvest yet. The real bulking up happens after flowering, when the plant redirects its energy from producing leaves and flowers to filling out the potatoes. This is also the time when you want to be most consistent with your watering. The potatoes are swelling, and they need steady moisture to develop evenly. I mark the date of first flowering on my calendar, and then count forward about 3 to 4 weeks. That is when the real magic is happening underground. Eventually, the plants will start to yellow and die back. This is the signal that harvest time is approaching. Do not rush this. The longer the potatoes sit in the soil after the tops have died back, the thicker and more durable their skins become. Thick skins mean better storage. Thin-skinned new potatoes are wonderful to eat fresh, but they will not keep. If you want potatoes that last through the winter, you need to let them mature fully. Once the tops are completely brown and withered, stop watering entirely. Let the soil dry out for about a week. This makes harvest cleaner and helps cure the potatoes slightly while they are still in the ground. The dry soil falls away from the tubers more easily, and the skins begin to set. And now we get to the best part. The harvest, and this is where the bag method completely destroys traditional in-ground, growing in terms of sheer satisfaction. There is no digging. There is no fork. There is no accidentally stabbing a beautiful potato because you could not see where it was. You simply dump the bag out onto a tarp or a piece of cardboard. That is it. Tip the whole thing over, Gently break apart the soil and pull out your potatoes. They will be clean, undamaged, and every single one will be right there. No lost potatoes left in the ground to rot and attract pests next year. No mystery about how many you actually grew. Just a pile of perfect potatoes sitting on a tarp. The first time I did this, I actually laughed out loud. After years of back-breaking digging, sifting through clods of clay, and finding mangled potatoes that looked like they had been through a war, here was an entire harvest just tumbling out of a bag onto the ground, clean and whole. It felt like cheating. I remember calling my wife outside to look. She stood there watching me pull potato after potato out of a pile of soil on a blue tarp, and she said, "That's it. That's all you had to do." And I just nodded because there was nothing else to say. It really was that simple. Once you have harvested, you need to cure your potatoes for storage. This is not complicated, but it is essential. Lay the potatoes out in a single layer in a cool, dark, well-ventilated space for about 1 to 2 weeks. A garage, a basement, a shaded porch, anywhere out of direct sunlight with decent airflow. Do not wash them before curing. The soil will dry and brush off easily later, and washing introduces moisture that can lead to rot. During curing, the skins thicken, and any small nicks or cuts heal over. The potatoes are essentially sealing themselves for storage. After the curing period, gently brush off any remaining soil and inspect each potato. Any that are damaged, cut, or showing signs of rot should be eaten first. The perfect ones go into long-term storage. Store your cured potatoes in a dark, cool, humid environment. The ideal temperature is around 40 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit. A root cellar is perfect, but most of us do not have one. A cool basement closet, an unheated garage that does not freeze, or even a cardboard box in the coolest part of your house will work. The key is darkness. Light triggers the production of solanine, which turns potatoes green and bitter and makes them unsafe to eat. Keep them in a paper bag, a cardboard box, or a burlap sack. Do not store them in plastic, which traps moisture and promotes rot. Check on them every few weeks and remove any that are starting to soften. One bad potato can spread rot to the whole box. And this brings me to the part of the cycle that actually makes the title of this video true. The part where you genuinely never spend money on potatoes again. Once you have your harvest, you have your seed potatoes for next year. Select some of your best specimens, medium-sized, healthy, blemish-free potatoes, and set them aside. Store them the same way you store your eating potatoes, but keep them separate and label them clearly. In the spring, those potatoes will have sprouted and will be ready to plant. You will not need to buy seed potatoes. You will not need to buy potatoes at the grocery store. You will simply plant your own stock in the same bags with the same soil that you can refresh with a little compost, and the cycle will continue. Let me put some numbers on this so you understand the economics. A 5-pound bag of organic potatoes at the grocery store costs somewhere around $5 to $7, depending on where you live and the time of year. If your household eats 5 pounds of potatoes per week, which is not unreasonable if you cook regularly, that is roughly $300 per year on potatoes alone. A single 10-gallon grow bag, properly planted and maintained, will produce 10 to 15 pounds of potatoes in a season. 3 bags will give you 30 to 45 pounds. That is enough to supply a small household for months. And your only ongoing costs are a little water, a little fertilizer, and the 20 minutes it takes to set everything up in the spring. The bags themselves will last for years if you take care of them. At the end of the season, empty them completely, shake out the soil, and let them dry thoroughly in the sun. Fold them up and store them somewhere dry until spring. The soil can be dumped into a compost pile or used as a top dressing for other garden beds. Do not reuse the same soil for potatoes the following year. Potatoes are susceptible to soil-borne diseases, and rotating your growing medium is the simplest way to prevent problems. Fresh potting mix and compost each year is a small price to pay for a guaranteed healthy harvest. Now I want to address a few questions that I know are going to come up, because they came up for me when I first started researching this method. Can you do this on a balcony? Yes, absolutely. A 10-gallon bag has a footprint of about 15 inches in diameter. You can fit several on a standard apartment balcony. The only requirement is sunlight. If your balcony gets at least 6 hours of direct sun, you can grow potatoes. If it gets less, you can still grow them, but your yield will be lower. The plants will be leggier and the tubers smaller. But it is still worth doing. One thing to keep in mind with a balcony is weight. A fully watered 10-gallon bag weighs about 40 to 50 pounds. Most balconies can handle that easily, but if you are planning to line your entire balcony with bags, check the weight rating first. Do you need to use specific potato varieties? Not really. Most varieties will grow well in bags. But in my experience, determinate varieties, which grow to a certain height and then stop, tend to perform better in containers than indeterminate varieties, which keep vining indefinitely. Yukon Gold, Red Pontiac, and Kennebec are all excellent choices for bag growing. Fingerling varieties also do surprisingly well. Experiment with what grows best in your climate and what you like to eat. What about pests? This is another area where bags have a significant advantage over in-ground growing. Many potato pests, like wireworms and Colorado potato beetles, overwinter in the soil. When you use fresh potting mix in a bag each year, you break that pest cycle. You are starting clean. That does not mean you will never see a pest. Potato beetles can fly in from neighboring gardens, but your pest pressure will be dramatically lower. And because your plants are in bags, you can physically move them if you notice a problem developing. Try doing that with an in-ground potato patch. If beetles show up, you can pick the bag up and move it to the other side of the yard, away from the infestation. What about diseases? Same principle. Fresh soil, clean seed potatoes, and good air circulation from the fabric bags all work together to minimize disease pressure. The most common potato diseases, things like early blight and late blight, are fungal and spread in wet, crowded conditions. The breathability of the fabric bags keeps the soil from staying too wet, and the fact that you can space your bags apart means you are not creating the dense, humid canopy that fungal diseases love. Give each bag at least a foot of space on all sides. The air needs to move between them. Now I want to step back for a moment and talk about why this method, which is so simple and so effective, is not more widely known. And I think the answer is honestly kind of annoying. There is no money in it for the companies that dominate the gardening industry. Think about it. If everyone grew potatoes in $3 fabric bags filled with basic potting mix and compost, what would happen to the companies selling rototillers and raised bed kits and fungicides and all the other products we have been told we need? They would lose a lot of customers. And so these simple methods, the ones that actually work, the ones that have been used by small-scale growers for generations, they get buried under an avalanche of more complicated, more expensive, more product-dependent alternatives. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is just how markets work. Simple, cheap solutions are not profitable to promote. So nobody promotes them. And unless you happen to stumble across an older gardener who has been doing it this way for decades, you might never know it is even an option. I think about this a lot. I think about all the knowledge that has been lost or obscured simply because it did not generate enough profit for someone. And I think about how many people have given up on growing their own food because they tried the conventional methods, the ones that require expensive inputs and backbreaking labor, and they concluded that it was too hard. It breaks my heart a little, honestly, because growing your own food should not be hard. It should not be expensive. It should be one of the simplest, most natural things a person can do. And when you strip away all the marketing and all the products and all the complicated systems, it is. A potato wants to grow. It is literally programmed to do it. You have seen potatoes sprouting in your pantry, in the dark, with no soil and no water. That is a plant screaming at you that it wants to live. All you have to do is give it the right conditions. A little soil, some water, some sun, and it will do the rest. The bag method is not a trick. It is not a hack. It is just giving the potato what it needs in the simplest possible way. And here is the thing that I find genuinely exciting. Once you realize how well this works for potatoes, you start looking at everything differently. You start wondering what else you can grow in a bag. Tomatoes do beautifully in fabric bags. So do peppers, eggplants, cucumbers, even carrots if you get a deep enough bag. You start realizing that you do not need a big yard, or perfect soil, or a lot of money. or any of the things you thought you needed to grow your own food. You just need bags, dirt, seeds, and sunlight. That is it. That is the whole secret. So here is what I want you to do. If you have ever wanted to grow your own potatoes, or if you have tried and failed and given up, I want you to try this. Get one bag. Just one. A 10-gallon fabric grow bag. Some potting mix. Some compost. A few seed potatoes. Set it up on your patio or your balcony, or in a sunny corner of your yard. Follow the steps I laid out here. And in about 3 to 4 months, tip that bag over and see what you get. I am willing to bet that you will be shocked. I am willing to bet that you will be back next season buying more bags and expanding your operation. And I am willing to bet that at some point during that first harvest, as you are pulling perfect, clean potatoes out of a pile of soil on a tarp, you will have the same thought I had. Why did nobody tell me about this sooner? If this video helped you, if it gave you the confidence to try something new, do me a favor and pass it on. Share it with someone who has been struggling with their garden. Share it with someone who thinks they do not have enough space to grow food. Share it with someone who has given up on the idea of growing their own potatoes because the traditional way was too much work. This knowledge should not be a secret. It should not be buried. It should be in the hands of every person who wants to grow their own food and save their own money and take one more step toward feeding themselves without depending on a system that makes everything harder and more expensive than it needs to be. If you want to see more of this kind of thing, real methods that actually work, no gimmicks, no products, just proven techniques that make gardening simpler and more accessible, then subscribe to this channel. I put out videos like this regularly, and every single one of them is built on the same principle. Show you what works, explain why it works, and help you succeed without spending a fortune. Thanks for watching. Now go get yourself a bag and start growing.